As 2020 finally comes to a close, I thought I'd do something a bit fun compared to what I normally do. A top 5 video. I know, I'm so original. As it stands, I'd say 2020 ended up being a pretty eventful year for video games for myself and many others. So many games that were highly anticipated finally released, for better or for worse. Some games got some incredible DLC, and I'd argue that, especially given the circumstances developers had to work with this year, there have been a plethora of amazing games released this year. So I thought I'd do something pretty fun to end off 2020, being my top 5 favorite games of this year. Now, before we start though, there are a couple things I'd like to get out of the way. 1. Obviously, I didn't play every single new release this year. For example, games like Hades, Cyberpunk 2077, Resident Evil 3 Remake, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, those games will not be on this list. Not because I have any issues with those games, far from it, it's just the fact that either A, I wanted to wait to play some of them, like Cyberpunk, or B, they simply flew under my radar, or C, I am waiting for a sale, in the case of RE3 Remake. 2. Just because I rank one game higher over another in this list doesn't mean I think less of the games I rank lower than it. I may have some issues with some of the games in this list, but as a whole, I think that all of these games are simply great to amazing, even with their flaws. There's a reason they're on this list, because the positive heavily outweigh the negative in almost every regard. Alrighty, I think that's it. Let's do this. These are my top 5 favorite games of 2020 in no particular order. Let's do this. Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time. I am so happy to say that this game made this list. I'm not gonna lie, I was always pretty excited for Crash 4 upon its reveal, but some things did worry me at first. The biggest one being Toys for Bob working on the game and not Vicarious Visions, the team that worked on the Insane Trilogy. I absolutely loved the Insane Trilogy for the most part. So to hear that Vicarious Vision wasn't working on it, but instead the developers of the Spyro Reignited trilogy, it left me a little bit worried. But even with these worries, I was still excited. It was a new number entry in the Crash series. And, for the most part at least, Toys for Bob proved me dead wrong. Crash 4 is a phenomenal game, both as a platformer and as a brand new Crash game. Sure, the game isn't perfect, we'll get to it, but when it comes down to the actual platforming, box breaking, gem collecting, Crash 4 is a stellar experience. Crash and Coco have never felt this good in a game before in my opinion. Things like the slide I thought I wouldn't like just going off of the videos that were showing prior to the release, but I genuinely love it. Having that hang time when you slide off of an edge is so smooth but so nice to pull off, and it can make some platforming parts extremely fun. Visuals, oh man, this is something I wasn't huge on at first either though. Personally, I did like the look of the Insane Trilogy more than Crash 4. At first. After playing it though, Crash 4 is easily the better looking game. I think it's the most obvious with characters like Engine, who looks like a cartoon character in the best way possible in 4, and...
So, Crash Bandicoot, we meet again.
Looks like a heroin addict in the Insane Trilogy. This game screams Saturday morning cartoon more than any other game I've played. The animations are so nice, there's a nice amount of squash and stretch in practically every regard. The game is an absolute treat on the eyes. To be completely fair though, I would have put the game a bit higher if not for the god-awful 100% aspect of it. Most Crash games have some tedious way to 100%ing the game, that's honestly par for the course. However, Crash 4 went a bit too far with it in my opinion, the box placements and the 3 deaths or less gem being my least favorite aspect. So many of the boxes in this game remind me of that awful one from Cold Hard Crash and Crash 2, and that one awful box is everywhere in Crash 4. I missed my one box in the first level for fuck's sake. Honestly, if you want a better video explaining everything that's wrong with this game's completion requirements, I'd recommend checking out Catacris's Crash 4 video. He goes over it perfectly there and describes everything wrong with it. But hey, take away that aspect of the game and you still have an amazing Crash game at its core. I'm super happy that Toys for Bob managed to prove me wrong, and here's hoping to an even better Crash 5. Just tone down the 100% aspect next time. Persona 5 Royal. Now, to be completely transparent here, I'm still working on a review of P5R that I'm hoping to get up early next year. It's kind of a pain sorting through 500 gigabytes of footage. So with that said, I'm not going to go super into specifics with this part as I want to save my further thoughts for an eventual review. But yeah, to put it simply, P5R is amazing. For the most part. Yeah, I haven't exactly been subtle on my feelings towards Royal and some of its new additions, whether it be on Twitter or in past videos. Let me get these out of the way. I didn't really like Kasumi, I didn't care for Jose, I thought the third semester could have been a little better, and I plain disliked the new true ending. And considering one of those things I didn't like is easily Royal's biggest selling point, it's been a bit tough for me to really get my feelings about Royal on a script. But hey, those negatives do not outweigh the positives of Royal at all. Royal is still Persona 5 at its core, one of my favorite games of all time, but with a boatload of quality of life improvements. And hey, I didn't say I hated every edition. Let's get this one out of the way. While I do prefer the original P5 story as a whole, some of Royal's new additions are simply great. Akechi is a good example in my opinion. A character I found myself feeling meh about in the original P5, I think is done much better in Royal due to him having an actual manual confidant now. It's not the best confidant in the game, but it's easily one of my favorites. It sells the idea of him and Ren's friendship much more than the original did in my opinion. Then there's Takuto Maruki, who in my opinion is my favorite story addition in Royal. Without any spoilers, I loved this character. I feel like he's one of the few new additions in Royal that doesn't feel like he stands out as being a new addition. I feel like he fits pretty well. I also really loved his confidant, both in his abilities and his story. And his dynamic with Ren I think works perfectly. This part made me laugh my ass off. Plus, without getting into spoilers once again, I think he's done perfectly in late game. Again, no spoilers. And even though I do think some aspects of the third semester could have been better, it's still a solid new addition to the story that's fairly easy to unlock and was one of my biggest highlights in Royal. Hey, I may not have liked some of the new story content in Royal, but the positives in it definitely outweigh the negatives by a landslide. Hell, even though I definitely have a lot of issues with Yoshizawa, she's at her absolute strongest in the third semester. And then there's the quality of life updates, and oh man, they did such a good job with these. Whether it's new additions like the Will Seeds, Kichijoji, ways to track your stats better, show times, the retooling to some palaces, whatever it may be, Royal is 100% a better game to play compared to the original. Sure, with darts and baton passes being fucking busted, the game is piss easy, but it's a fun kind of piss easy. Hey, it's not to say this game wasn't difficult at points, still, fuck the Okumura fight. And Mementos, oh man, talk about making an area that was a snooze fest in the original so much better in Royal. Not just the new music, though that's definitely a treat, but the new gameplay additions. New floor layouts, collecting stamps and flowers for Jose so you can get some new items. So much of it is just better now. Like I said, I want to go into much more detail down the road with a full-on review where I can go into much more detail. But to put it simply, while I have a few issues with P5R, it doesn't take away from the new stuff that I love and the old stuff that I love. It's still Persona 5 at its core, but in many ways even better than it was before. Now I'm hoping Strikers can make me feel the same way next year. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. As we're now in the top 3, I think it's fitting that these 3 are games that hit me in pretty much all of the right spots. Whether it's the story, the gameplay, the characters, whatever it might be. And a remake of my favorite game of all time, including a new epilogue, it was definitely going to be on this list. I've already made a review on this game, so I won't go into too much detail here, but Xenoblade DE, god, this was amazing. I want to make this kind of short since I've already reviewed the game, but I want to start off with the story. I feel like most Xenoblade fans still hold the opinion that one has the best story out of all 3 Xenoblade games, without knocking the other 2 games, and it is honestly pretty true. Even 10 years later, this story still holds up extremely well. Whether it's the characters, the action, the emotional moments, or the voice acting, the writing, the game's story, for the most part at least, is still amazing and is one of my favorite JRPG stories of all time. The quality of life updates, though, make DE for me. Not just the new models, not just the visuals, but the gameplay differences. Battling has never felt better in this game due to things like the chance prompt with a much cleaner UI, or just going around the world and tackling side quests. It's all so much better. The new tracking feature in side quests is easily my favorite new addition, making side quests much easier to tackle quickly and efficiently in every regard. But the new models are such a treat though. Takahashi has mentioned that this game is a 60% from the ground up remake and 40% a remaster, and these models show the work that the team at Remodel the Soft put into DE. The new models are so expressive, lively, and the new models are so expressive, lively, and just look so good. Hey, while I may have found Feature Connected kind of disappointing in some regards, it's still amazing to finally be able to experience the Biona's shoulder after all this time, and it's a great way to give Melia a much better ending than she had in the original. Play this game if you haven't already, and the rest of the Xeno series too while you're at it. Whether it's Gears, Saga, or Blade, the whole series is a treat, but DE is the best way to experience one of the best JRPGs of all time. Now, these last 2 were a bit tough for me. Both of these games I absolutely loved, both being PS4 exclusives, and both are games I fell in love with from beginning to end. But if I had to choose my number 2 game is, well... Ghost of Tsushima. This right here is one of my favorite games ever made. Ghost of Tsushima was something that I was interested in from the very start, and the game delivered in practically every regard. Its story, while starting off a bit slow, ended up being one of the most impactful on PS4, with some amazing writing, character progression, and pacing. At first, I thought the story was sort of solid, but nothing incredible. However, the further I got into Act 1, the more and more I fell in love with it. And Act 2, and especially Act 3, are so incredible to the point where I can barely put it into words. I definitely don't want to spoil anything here, you just need to experience it for yourself. But the gameplay is just so damn good. The combat is something I was a bit mixed on at first due to the lack of lock-on mechanic, but I quickly grew adjusted to it, and the combat is something I loved very quickly. The different stances you can use, the amount of items you can use to either kill or distract enemies with, it's so expansive, but so much fun. And just simply riding on horseback, taking in the world around you, interacting with different people, fighting off Mongols, the world in Ghost is just amazing. The lighting, the colors, the amount of things you can do. Ghost has so much you can do in its world to the point where I nearly spent 70 hours in the game before completion, and I'm still finding stuff. I got similar feelings to this when I first played Breath of the Wild, a game that's this expansive that has so much you can find and do, and taking in a breathtaking world while you're doing it, it's amazing. If you haven't played Ghost of Tsushima yet, I would highly recommend doing so. And hell, if you're on a PS5, you get 60 FPS, which is what I used for this video, which made the experience even better. Seriously, play this game if you haven't already for not just the great story, but for one of the best open world games of the last generation. And now, my game of the year for 2020. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Don't worry, I never forget about this one, and it's easily my favorite game released this year. Like Xenoblade DE though, I already did a review in this game, so I'm going to make this segment a bit shorter than some of the other ones. In almost every regard, Final Fantasy VII Remake fulfilled much of what I wanted from this game. A remake of one of my favorite games of all time, or at least a portion of it, and it exceeded my expectations at so many moments. The story, I'm so happy they decided to expand upon Midgar. Sure, the Whisperers sucked ass, but I honestly feel like that's the only major negative I have with the story. Almost everything else with Midgar is so good here, expanding upon the Avalanche crew like Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, bringing in new characters, and expanding upon characters who were already established in the original like Johnny, or making the original cast even better like Barrett. The characters are at their best in this game, and I'm so happy they didn't screw up characters like Cloud or Aerith. They're like how they were in the original, and I love that. I was worried they were going to screw them up. It's safe to say the score had a lot to live up to with the remake, and I personally feel like they did a great job when it comes down to its story. Not every aspect of it is perfect, but when it came down to expanding Midgar to roughly a 40-50 hour adventure, I think they did a great job. And its gameplay didn't disappoint either. Whether it's the world around you or the combat, the side quests, I genuinely loved Remake's gameplay. It isn't all perfect, air combat's a bit of a pain with some of the characters, but it's still really damn fun. The combat's one of my favorite things in the remake. I love during a big attack with Cloud, like when I'm using Braver, just switching over to Tifa or Barrett and pulling off another way to do pressure to get the enemy staggered, or just simply experimenting with materia. The gameplay when it comes down to the combat in the remake did not disappoint one bit. In the world of Midgar, they didn't disappoint. Sure, the skyboxes are kind of rough and some of the textures are kind of bad, but it's small compared to everything else. Midgar feels so lively or interesting no matter where you go. Whether it's the slums of Sector 7 or Shinra Tower, Square Enix did a great job at expanding upon an already memorable part of Final Fantasy VII, in my opinion. The music too, oh man, can we all agree Remake's OST is amazing? I really feel like there's not even one song in here I don't find at least catchy as hell, or gives me chills when I listen to it. There have been many games this year that have gotten me emotional, but Remake hit me in all the right spots so many times. Whether it was the individual character moments, the writing, the music, visuals, whatever it might be. FF7R hit me in the right spots many times over, to the point where I couldn't not put it as my game of the year. Not many games made me feel the way this one did. What else can I say? I love this game. It's my game of the year for 2020 by far, and I can't wait to see what Nomura and his team do with the rest of the Remake project. And that's it. Those are my top 5. With that said, what was your favorite game this year? Let me know down below. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great night. Stay safe. Signing off. Peace out, everyone.